welcome to another episode of the Green Fund's CannaCast. My name is Louis, and today's guest is Stephen McDowell, also known as the Buzzy Kiwi, which we get into in the podcast. Stephen is a visual content producer who has worked with brands like Sony, Booking.com, Mophie, and many more companies. While Stephen initially had plans to go into sports science and fitness for a career, it was an injury that brought his attention to the powers of medical cannabis. As such, Stephen has now utilized his video-making expertise to make a documentary on cannabis called Grassroots, the Reality of Cannabis Legalisation. I'd highly recommend the documentary for anyone looking to touch up on their cannabis knowledge, particularly those listening from New Zealand. Part of Stephen's impetus to make the documentary, as he explains in this podcast, is to raise awareness and remove the stigma surrounding cannabis prior to New Zealand's upcoming cannabis referendum on September 19th this year. So strap yourselves in as I chat with Stephen about all things cannabis and how he came to be the Buzzy Kiwi. Who is Stephen? Who is the Buzzy Kiwi? Why do you call yourself that? How did you get that name if it was given to you? What's your backstory?
I started the Buzzy Kiwi actually in a hostel in Barcelona. I was sitting there talking with some people over dinner because I was traveling the world, and I'd been backpacking for about 2 years, and I was just taking photos, making videos for fun, and I was going to start sharing them online. And someone said, well, what's your name? And I was like, well, I don't know. The Buzzy Kiwi, because we had just been talking about the word buzzy being a New Zealand slang word for celebrating difference. So if something's buzzy, it's like bizarre and trippy combined. It's a good thing, and it's good because it's different. So the Buzzy Kiwi is celebrating New Zealanders being different, and it just stuck. The name stuck. It was the first name I came up with, and it never left. And then coming back to New Zealand, so I started producing social media content, started building the following, and my following I started growing from more inspirational and motivational content. And a lot of that stemmed from the fact that I was living this lifestyle that a lot of people deemed impossible. And going back to New Zealand, I don't know if anyone else in the world realizes, but New Zealand has quite a tall poppy syndrome where we like to cut people down who try to be different and try and stand out. So the Buzzy Kiwi became almost a movement. It was giving people the confidence to be themselves in a country that usually attacks people for being different. So that's where it originated. That's why I'm called the Buzzy Kiwi. And then I continued just making video content, continued building that authentic following, and here we are today talking about cannabis, because things obviously went in a different direction at some point.
Evidently. And it's interesting that you say New Zealand has a tall poppy syndrome, because I feel like, and I'm not sure if you've traveled to Australia much, I feel like the same is very much true for Australia. And whenever I watch, say, reality shows about America, there's almost something odd about them in the sense that they're so uninhibited. They're so theatrical. They're so, and to me, part of me thinks that's so weird, that's so bad in some senses because of the conditioning of the tall poppy syndrome, where it's weird to be eccentric or to be over the top or to enjoy attention. So it's funny that you say that. But why do you think that is? Why do you think this tall poppy syndrome emerges in, say, places like New Zealand or Australia and not in places like America as much?
That's a really big question. I have thought about it and talked about it a lot. The origins scientifically from the research, they believe the tall poppy syndrome comes from the fact that we are Irish and Scottish descendants. We were the lower socioeconomic. We came over with our boots on our feet, and that's it. And we built everything. So it's that working class mentality, and therefore it's almost a rejection of the elite class. And then when fame started coming involved and success started coming involved, people viewed that as that elite class, and they started trying to humble. They used the word humble. I'm humbleizing you. And it just, I think, grew over generations of that type of mentality. And I'm from Invercargill, the bottom of New Zealand, town of 50,000 people, Catholic school my whole life, Catholic mum, never drunk, never smoked. Like, I'm not from some hippie alternative family at all. And coming out of it and going to America and seeing what you're talking about, these people that are just unapologetically themselves, it was a shock. It was like, whoa, you're going to wear that? You're going to say that? You're going to be that? That's outrageous. But they celebrate it. And people don't understand that until you go to America, because they view it as superficial. But in reality, you're actually giving the freedom for people to be their true selves. And some people are superficial. So that comes out. But not everybody in America is superficial. They're just unapologetically themselves. So why New Zealand and Australia don't have that, man, it's a big question. Maybe we haven't experienced the kind of fame and success that is overseas. Maybe it is that origins of our past from the Scottish and Irish heritage. Maybe it's just a small place where you know each other and know everyone. And when you're isolated, I can speak for New Zealand, I can't speak for Australia, and I can speak for Invercargill especially. When you're isolated at the bottom of the world, there's almost a taught behavior that's where you belong, that you couldn't do something else because you're from Invercargill. You couldn't be an actor because you're from Invercargill. You couldn't be an All Black because you're from Invercargill. And I think it allows people peace and comfort to tell others that they can't achieve, because then when they go to sleep at night, they can feel like their life is okay at the point it is. I think if someone succeeds beside you, it challenges what you're doing with your life. And people don't like that, especially in a small place. They don't like their life to feel inadequate. And I think that's where it comes from, is fear of people around them becoming successful, which makes them look like they're not achieving. Does that make sense?
No, it makes complete sense. And I think part of it is because our self-identity is wrapped up in the people around us and the reflections we get from them. So if, for example, everyone around you is a Hollywood celebrity and you're working at, Kohl's or some grocery store, you might feel inadequate. But if you can see that happening and you try and stop that, those feelings of inadequacy might never arise, simply because the people around you are doing equal or worse than you. And it's a very sad, I guess, way to live life, but it does make sense to me. It's a fear of inadequacy, of people around you surpassing you. And I've thought about this before in the sense that I call it like reverse competition, in the sense that a good competition is, you might make videos, I might make videos, and I say, okay, well, he's making good videos, I need to make better videos. And that's a good competition to me. But some people or some cultures, whatever it might be, have a reverse sense of that, where it's, he's making good videos, I need to stop him so that I don't have to do that. And it's a funny way to think, but a lot of people do live that way. But something that stuck out to me is you mentioning you hadn't drank, you hadn't smoked. I assume that's changed now?
Yeah, it's changed a little bit. Yeah, well, life happened. So especially, let's talk about the cannabis side. I myself have had 2 hip surgeries. I had them by the time I was 21, and they left me in constant pain every single day. So I was taking pharmaceuticals. I was taking strong pharmaceuticals to deal with that pain. And one day I had a really bad reaction to tramadol, and I was vomiting, I was shaking, my body was in hot sweats, cold sweats, and I was like, this is not okay. Like, I was literally a bartender. I was trying to get through my shift as a bartender, and I'm sitting there in like a drug-induced freak out because I'm in pain. And I was like, I have to find an alternative. So I started looking into the research of cannabis and started seeing that people were using it for chronic pain. They were using it for anxieties. They were using it for depression. And the research was becoming more and more available because places were legalizing. it was not available so much before that because it's really hard to do research when there's no ethical approval, and it has to be legal to have ethical approval. So this was about 2015. So it was, Oregon was just legalizing. I think Colorado had legalized a few years before. So the information was very new, and I was kind of viewed as a hippie or a crazy person to be looking into this. But when you're faced with the pain yourself, trust me, you don't understand until you've been in constant pain. You will do anything to get rid of it, anything at all. So I started looking into the cannabis, and then I started using the cannabis, and it started helping, and it had nowhere near the adverse side effects that the pharmaceuticals I was taking were having. So it's not at that point where I became a super supporter. I just changed my mindset. I was like, okay, I've been taught my whole life that this has no medical benefits. I've now experienced those. Therefore, I now believe in cannabis. It kind of ended there for a few years. And then by just the universe doing its thing, I ended up stumbling into a medicinal cannabis farm in America. I'd been traveling for about 3 years at that point, and through a friend, we'd ended up at this farm, and I saw it with my own eyes. I was just blown away at the size of the plants, at the beauty of the plants, the diversity of the plants, because a lot of people don't realize there's thousands of different strains, and different strains are better for different ailments and diseases. And then just learning all of this, learning the difference between sativa and indica, learning about CBD and THC, my mind just exploded. I was like, I don't understand how this is not common knowledge. Why would I talk to a doctor? Does a doctor not know this stuff? And that is where it all blew open, and I just started researching and went into a whole of research and discussion with people to find out why has something that has so much benefit been demonized. And I learned that in the endocannabinoid system that every single human being has, and that is how we process the cannabinoids from cannabis to get the medicinal benefits, that was only discovered in 1988. So it's 30 years old. And that means anyone over the age of 50 that studied medicine or health or the human body at university never learned about this. It wasn't in the textbooks because they didn't know. No one knew. And unless they've gone back and re-educated themselves, which, let's face it, majority of them haven't, they still have this impression, okay, when I was learning at university, they didn't talk about cannabis, so therefore it has no medicinal benefits. So once you understand that this is being not people's fault, they don't not believe in cannabis because they're bad people. They don't believe in cannabis because they genuinely have never been educated. And I decided, right, I'm going to educate these people, because New Zealand we agreed about, I think it was 2017, they agreed that they were going to have a vote eventually by the end of this general election for New Zealand's Labour Party. And I was like, okay, the time's going to come. It's going to be next election. That's going to be in 2020. So I started preparing and doing all the research I could to be able to bring together a educational piece that could hopefully tackle and address this misinformed generational bias. And that's where we are today. I released that documentary a week ago.
Okay, and that is something obviously I wanted to cover in this interview, was your documentary Grassroots. Now, obviously, you've given me a bit of a backstory as to why you made it, tackling some of the misinformation surrounding cannabis. What I found interesting is, the previously peddled gateway theory. Something that I've been thinking about, and I've heard a few people mention this, is, and you kind of touched upon this, is there is a gateway theory in effect, and not the one that people suppose, in legalizing cannabis. Because once people try it, as you've just described, what often seems to happen is they go, oh, it's not that bad. Maybe they do a bit of research, they find out there's all these medicinal benefits, and suddenly the entire war on drugs comes into question. Yeah. And then it is a gateway drug in the sense that you no longer trust the officials who are telling you which drugs are good and which drugs are bad. But when you talk about this misinformation, why do you think that is? Why do you think there has been such a negative perception of cannabis for decades?
There's a few different answers to that. One would be what I just mentioned about the just blatantly not knowing. If you don't know, you don't know. So you've got people like my mother who genuinely believe in their heart that cannabis is dangerous and it kills people, because that's what they have been taught. And they've never even tried to go outside that. So that's one aspect. There's the kind of, what would you call it, a conspiracy theory behind it, where people would say, those who use cannabis become a lot more open-minded. They start to question a lot of the world, and they start to have more political debates. They start to invest in a lot more deeper and meaningful conversation. And that could be a threat to a lot of the systems that we have in society. Do I truly believe that's the reason why it's illegal? I think there's an element that has to contribute, but I don't think it's the number one reason. There's also a lot of people that say the pharmaceutical companies never wanted it to be legal because it would take away from their business. I definitely believe that to be true. And then if you go back in history, you actually find a period of time where, off the top of my head, I can't remember the guy's name. I don't want to say it because I'll get it wrong, but there was a man who, he had a paper mill to produce the paper for the newspapers in America, and hemp paper was coming up, and using hemp rather than synthetics was coming up for clothing as well. So that man specifically started lobbying negative propaganda about cannabis and was one of the leading voices to actually get cannabis made illegal and demonized, which completely removed the whole entire hemp industry, which removed the hemp as clothing, it removed the hemp as paper, and it took away all that competition. That's another reason why cannabis has been demonized, but a lot of people wouldn't even know that, because you've got to go quite far back in the history to even learn that kind of thing. So as you see, there's a lot of different reasons. You've also got just the general basic reason of someone that's depressed will tend to use cannabis, so people associate the cannabis as causing the depression. They don't realize that the depression came first. Or if someone is struggling with life, they might not have a job, they might be sitting at home not doing much, they tend to use cannabis because it helps them feel better about being in a low point in their life. Then people start to associate, okay, well, they're using cannabis, that's why they're in that position in life. They don't realize that the cannabis comes after. So there's so many different reasons why people view cannabis negatively. It's been indoctrinated into our societies as negative. It has been reinforced by people throughout generations as negative. You could argue that there's a lot of corporate investment, like the alcohol companies, the tobacco companies, the pharmaceutical companies that wouldn't want it legalized. There's so many reasons. And I start to sound like a crazy person when I bring all of them up, but it is what it is. It's the truth, in my opinion. And I would recommend people to go out and do their own research. Don't listen to me like I'm fact. Anything I say, go research it and see if I'm telling the truth. That's all I have to. I always advocate people to peer review what I say. Don't take me for gospel, but if you actually have an open mind to listen and then you go do the research, I think you'll find the same thing that I've found out.
Yeah, well, to help audiences, the paper mill owner was William Randolph Hearst. So give him a Google and prove Stephen wrong. Prove him wrong if you'd like to. And it creates problems, the illegality of cannabis, in the sense that it's a bit of a catch-22 or a vicious cycle where to legalize cannabis, most legislators, I think sensibly, would like some evidence showing how safe it is, or the lack of danger, if it is dangerous, if it does cause mental health problems. But that research can often not be done simply due to the fact that cannabis is illegal. So it's this cycle where no evidence can be produced and the plant remains illegal. So it requires, I think, a great deal of courage on the part of legislators, such as in Colorado, one of the first states or places in general to legalize cannabis, because there is a drought of information. And you mentioned your documentary, which is largely a precursor to New Zealand's upcoming referendum. Should New Zealand take the leap and legalize cannabis, it would be massive for the country. Do you think they will legalize cannabis? And why do you think it will have an impact? And what impact do you think it will have?
I am going to say I do think we're going to legalize. I've got to keep that optimism. I've got to keep preaching that out to the universe. It is very close right now. The polls are 50-50. And that is simply because the older generation is misinformed and they're scared. It's all about fear. So I'm on a mission of education and for people to have these difficult conversations, because this is not just about legalizing cannabis for recreational use. This is an economic power shift in New Zealand's whole future. So to put it out to people out there, New Zealand would make $500 million every single year if we legalize cannabis. Currently, we spend $305 million on intervention, which is 87% of the total drug enforcement budget. We spend 19 times more money enforcing the law of cannabis than we do enforcing the law of methamphetamine. That right there should be enough for people. That is craziness, absolutely ludicrous. But not just that, we're then going to be able to tax it. We're going to be able to educate. We're going to be able to actually have children talk to their parents, talk to their teachers, and be told the actual educated reasons why not to use cannabis. Not this whole don't do it, don't look at it, don't even breathe its name, because that doesn't work. If it works, there would be no drugs. But prohibition has proven that no matter the consequences, humans will use these substances, not just cannabis, but many substances. So the stats are 95% of everyone that got caught using cannabis still uses cannabis. So even if you caught everybody, only 5% of them are going to stop using it in the current system. Why would you carry on with that system? Why would you keep investing hundreds of millions of dollars, police manpower? And then you've got the secondary effect that you've got a whole demographic of people that don't trust the police. And that's not healthy. That's super dangerous when people view the police as their enemy rather than as their friend. And I think if you took away, especially cannabis being a legal act, a huge amount of people would relax their view towards the police. So you've got the economic reasons, you've got the trust in community and trust in police, and then now we can touch on the medicinal reasons. You know, you've got fibromyalgia, you've got epilepsy, Parkinson's disease, anxiety, insomnia, all can be helped massively by medicinal cannabis. And people think, oh, okay, well, let's just legalize medicinal cannabis. Well, here's the problem. You put the power now back into the pharmaceutical companies, and New Zealand did that. And right now, to get a prescription for 2 to 4 weeks supply of CBD oil is $700. That's $25 a serving. Can you imagine if you went into the supermarket and paracetamol cost you $100 a packet? That's the equivalent right now. And if people are against monopoly, they're against big-time pharma and causing medicines to be expensive, then you need to see that recreational legalization would stop that from happening, because allowing others to actually have a competitive market stops that monopoly control. So, man, when you ask how it would benefit New Zealand, it benefits so many ways. And then you compare to Canada, who has legalized a year and a half ago, and their youth rate has decreased by 10%. Because all of a sudden, like I said before, you can talk about it. Teachers can talk about it. Parents can talk about it. You can get the proper education. And now you remove the cool factor. You remove the rebellious factor. And like you mentioned before, I love that you said it, because it's so true. If you tell kids their whole entire lives that cannabis is bad, it's the devil's lettuce and it's going to kill you, and then they use it and realize that that's not true, they start questioning everything. And all of a sudden, they don't trust what you've told them. And then they will start using other things because, well, you lied about cannabis, so you're probably lying about this as well. And it gets into this really negative cycle. Whereas if you can cut that at the younger level and educate them properly and say, this is what cannabis does, this is the effects, these are the negative effects, and this is how you safely use it, you're not going to have that "you've lied to me" when they finally try it and realize that 99% of people don't have a negative effect.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I wonder what our world would look like if instead of having a drug education system that's simply anti-drug and they just say, don't do drugs, if we had one that instead said, here are the drugs, here are their effects, here are the settings that you might use them in. For example, cannabis might be used in a medicinal context. You might use psychedelics for like depression therapy, or I think there's early evidence to suggest it helps with PTSD. You know, I wonder what kind of world we would live in if children were given, instead of this kind of Voldemort treatment of don't talk about drugs, don't think about them, don't touch them, but instead if we said drug is a vague term, coffee's a drug, sugar's a drug, marijuana is a drug, alcohol, heroin, each of these has perhaps a practical use, and each of them has an impractical use or an excessive use. And if we approached it like that, how differently we would see future generations treat drugs, like things like addiction, things like even something as trivial as the fear that people have while stoned of authorities arresting them. That would dissipate if they knew, okay, here's the context I can use it in. It's legal. I'm 21, whatever it may be. It would shift virtually every face of society. And it sounds hyperbolic, but I truly believe it would.
No, you're 100% right. And let's talk about the effects of cannabis, right? People say, I get paranoid from using cannabis. Are you sure you're not paranoid from the fact that it's illegal and you're scared that you're in a vulnerable place and police might come and catch you? Because that happens with a lot of people. And then let's talk about the genuine negative effects of cannabis. So some people, there's a small percentage who have a predisposition to have schizophrenia in their family, right? That does not happen overnight from using cannabis. That happens from a chronic use of cannabis. Therefore, there's signs. I talked to a friend of mine who's schizophrenic. There's blatant signs saying this is affecting me negatively, leading up to the actual breaking point. If you took away that stigma and you actually educated people on these signs, then you could nip that right at the beginning. They could go to their teacher and say, hey, I've used cannabis and I'm having this negative effect. Can you give me advice? And the teacher can say, yeah, that seems in line with this. Therefore, I would strongly advise you not to use it. Here is a health professional, or here's the school counselor. They can talk you through why you're using it and what alternative practices are there to help you. And that can't happen right now because it's illegal. So you're right, the world we would live in, as much as it seems far-fetched, it would be a beautiful world of actual health relation and health focus, then criminal focus and the just straight, don't touch it, don't even look at it, it's bad. So I dream of that world. I dream of it. And I'm fighting to have that world because I want my kids to be in that world. I don't want them to experience the things that I've experienced from the illegality of substance. I've been in some super dangerous situations just to buy some weed. At 15 years old, you know, that would not happen if it was an illegal system. When was the last time you went and bought moonshine off a gang member because it was cheaper than buying alcohol from the store? It just doesn't work that way. You know, if your friend comes over with some homebrew, you might have a taste and be like, that's cute, man, but I'm going to go back to drinking my Heineken because I don't want your shitty homemade stuff, you know? But right now, the only thing that exists is moonshine and homebrew. So it's just a no-brainer to me, but it's hard to tell that to people that don't have experience with the substance because they're all coming from a place of fear. And I've got to understand that. I can't get angry at these people because they're just fearful. And fear breeds fear. So
you mentioned your fight to make sure that your children live in a more drug tolerant or more specifically cannabis tolerant future than you grew up in. How is that fight going? Now, obviously, you've made your documentary. I highly recommend everyone check it out. You can see in the documentary some of those how tall would you say these plants are? They were two people tall.
Oh, yeah, 15 foot high.
Yeah, they were huge, and it was like a Christmas tree. It was not just like a stalk. It was thick. So how is the just a complete aside? How is the response been to your documentary, and how is the fight going to change minds when it comes to cannabis?
The response has been surprisingly good. I was expecting so much more backlash and was almost prepared for it, but it hasn't come yet. Touch wood, it hasn't come yet. And I think that's because I really did cover a lot of the bases with education and science and facts. I didn't dive into my opinion. I dove into what the actual literature says and then just shared that with people. So it's kind of not saying there's nothing you can argue with, but I removed a lot of the points that people would have been able to argue, because at the end of the day, stats are stats, facts are facts, and when you just stick to that rule, there's not a lot you can be negative about. So I haven't had a lot of negative backlash, which gives me hope that people are actually willing to learn something new and have an open mind. I have had some really beautiful messages of people saying they thought cannabis was super evil and super bad, and since watching my documentary, they have opened their mind to learn more, and they're going off to do that. So it just proves that education is the answer. These fights of you're wrong, no, you're wrong, no, you're wrong doesn't work, and you don't get anywhere. Does that mean that the fight has been won? Definitely not. There's a very long way to go, and I have found an enormous amount of people terrified to talk about this topic. You mentioned the word drugs. You mentioned the word legalization of cannabis. People just, it's so close to their comfort zone that they would rather push it away. And that's where the biggest issue is going to be. Unless this has affected your life personally, unless you have used substances, or if someone in your family has used substances, or someone in your family is suffering with pain, or they've been arrested, people don't tend to care. And it's trying to convince those people to care when it doesn't affect them, because they're privileged, right? So, and you know, I'm in a privileged state as well, but I realize that privilege, and a lot of people don't realize that privilege. So it's trying to bring this topic up to be discussed by engaging people who don't have a direct relationship to the topic. And that is where I'm struggling the most. You know, people don't even want to talk about it. I was having a conversation with a doctor. He was about in his 60s. And I started talking about cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. And he literally told me to shut up. He didn't want to hear it and walked away.
Wow.
And I was left there in front of like 10, 15 people, jaw dropped, speechless. Like, I can't believe this man will not even listen. It challenges his already existing beliefs so much that it's easier for him to walk away than to actually engage. And that is a hard thing to swallow. That's really hard. So I don't have the answer yet, but I do know one thing. Love and education is far greater than anger and fighting. Opinions and anger don't get you anywhere.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that point you made about kind of just basing your documentary around facts and removing any subjectivity and just saying, here's the facts, here's what we know, because it is harder to refute that. But even in those instances, you know, you just mentioned that story about the 60-year-old doctor. One would think, you know, a 60-year-old doctor is going to be highly intelligent, highly likely to listen to information. But I don't think that's necessarily true, simply because they've built up so much of their personality and their worldview around their knowledge of medicine, the medicines they know are okay, the medicines they know are not okay or think are not okay. And cannabis, for some people, falls into that latter category of dangerous drugs. And instead of him being open to, oh, maybe I'm wrong, which is not always an easy process to go through as well, to realize you've been lied to or you've been misinformed for decades in some instances. In a lot of cases, you know, this is information their parents have told them. So for you to come along and say, well, actually, this could be beneficial. It's not just him accepting information, it's him accepting that he's been wrong for so long and people around him have been wrong for so long, people he probably admired. So it's a very big hurdle, I think, in some instances, but those are the hurdles that I think you and I need to overcome in pushing for cannabis legalization, because there's no point preaching to the choir. We all know, anyone within these circles does not need to be convinced of the benefits of cannabis. It is all the people perhaps on the fence or all the way in the prohibition side of the aisle, which is going to be a much harder task, but that's where the real battle is. Yeah. But something you mentioned about the lack of willingness to discuss cannabis, do you think this plays into New Zealand's polling? Because I've seen the polls have oscillated a lot. They've been, slightly in favor, slightly against for, I believe, years now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not been stable. It's been moving within a small parameter. Do you think there's any element of people perhaps not willing to say that they will vote yes, and perhaps are afraid of the ramifications if people they know find out that they approve of cannabis legalization? Do you think that's happening at all?
I'm praying that that's the case. I'm praying that in reality, a lot of people are going to vote yes, but they're not willing to come out and say that publicly because, like you said, there's ramifications. And the fear, I guess, you've got to imagine is we're coming up to vote on something that's illegal currently. You put your voice out there and say, I support this as a yes, and then the vote goes through as a no, and all of a sudden your work colleagues, your boss, your church, everybody knows. And that's very terrifying for a lot of people. The judgment from others is terrifying. So I do believe there's an element of that, but that also is our biggest weakness because then these conversations don't happen. We need the people in our circle that you're saying that do understand the medicinal benefits to go out and instigate these difficult conversations, because it is that 15% in the middle that we must convince. The extremists on the nose, who are just like the doctor who refused to listen, you're never going to convince him, not in 2 months. Just let go of it. Let him go. It's the ones in the middle that you have to convince. And even over in Colorado, the vote was 56-44. In Oregon, it was 54, 40. Sorry, I think I've got this number. They won by 4 to 6%, not a lot. Nowhere has it been a landslide vote legalized. So it's really, really, really important that people have these conversations. But I understand the fear involved. There's a lot of fear involved. Most of the comments I get from people is, I would love to share this publicly, but I'm sorry my mum follows me, or I'm sorry my boss follows me, and I can't have them see that I use cannabis. It's like, how do you combat that? How do you make people feel safe to have this discussion? And I thought that leading up to the vote, more and more people would come out, but it hasn't happened so far. So you're right, it has been oscillating, the vote polls, for the past 2 or 3 years. And I always imagined, it's okay, in the last couple of months, the facts will come out. And they haven't. And that's what made me so determined with my documentary. It became the biggest priority in my life because I realized how much of a time restraint we're in right now. 7 weeks we vote on this. It's not a lot of time. It's really not.
And even if it's a yes, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the vote is non-binding. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's such a slippery slope. So yes, they've said it's non-binding because we in New Zealand, we have, pretty similar to everywhere else, we have National and Labour, left and right wing. And Labour's in government right now. They're the ones that put the vote forward. And to them, it's a binding referendum. If it's a yes, they're going to put it through. National has come back and said to hold face with their conservative support that it's non-binding, and that even if it goes through as a yes, they would still deny it. To me, that is such an attack on democracy. That is totally not okay. I personally, even if I was supporting National and I heard my team say that, I would change who I was supporting, because you can't you can't do that. You can't say a majority vote doesn't matter because we are traditionally a conservative party, and if we get in power, we're going to stick to those traditional values. No, you have to listen to the people. So I actually hope that it has a super negative effect on them, because I hope other people out there do feel that that is cheating the system and that is cheating democracy. And you can't allow that kind of behavior, no matter who you support. I would say the same thing if this was the Greens or if this was Labor. Anybody that says that the majority vote is non-binding, to me, is playing with fire. You're playing with the basic fabric that is our political system.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see if it is a yes vote and what happens from there. I mean, if assuming action is taken and the yes vote is honored, how long do you think it would take New Zealand to set up some kind of cannabis infrastructure?
I think it'll take about a year. So you would have to have, because New Zealand's in one of the best geographical positions to grow cannabis, and FYI, so is Australia. It's Hobart, the Tasmania, is pretty perfect, to be honest. Because of that, a lot of people are going to grow outdoors, which means it's seasonal, and that season is about November to April. So it's going to take, one solid season to have the actual products, and then it's going to take another couple of years to have the facilities to concentrate those products into oils and tinctures. And so for people listening, this is not just about smoking cannabis. This is about being able to have cannabis to extract the oils to create controllable, dosable products so that you know exactly how much THC you're getting every single time you use that. And that takes time. You don't just make that in your kitchen. You need laboratories, you need technicians, you need training. So I'm totally okay with that taking a year, 2 years, 3 years, because then it's going to get set up properly. But a yes vote doesn't mean that just the next day you're going to be able to go and buy at a dispensary. It's going to take time. But hey, this is a 20-year plan, in my opinion. The positive ramifications, the positive consequences from this are going to be seen 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the track. It's not going to be immediate. We've fixed everything. After the prohibition of alcohol ended, it took a solid 10 years to really get rid of the old ways and bring in more controlled ways. But now, think about it, prohibition was 100 years ago now. No one can remember a time where people died on the streets because they drank alcohol that was a triple percentage to what they thought it was. No one can remember that because it was so long ago, and the controls have been in place for so long that it's just distant memory. And that's what cannabis will be eventually. It'll be a distant memory that people were going and buying it off gang members and putting themselves in dangerous positions and being arrested. Like, we're going to tell our grandkids that people were in jail for using cannabis, and they're going to be like, what? That's crazy.
Yeah, we're going to tell them that we got arrested for smoking cannabis. There was a virus that kept us inside for who knows how long at this point. It's going to be so funny to tell children.
It's going to be a wild story for sure. We've lived through an extremely strange time of life. The technological revolution and the expansion of wealth that has happened in our lifetime. I won't get into it, but I'm very confident we're going to see some really crazy things in the next 20, 30 years. If 2020 is anything to go by, it's just going to get crazier.
You mentioned that places like New Zealand, Tasmania, and Hobart are fantastic for growing cannabis. And I've written articles about this from the angle of Tasmania being a hub for growing poppy. Sorry,
let me clarify that. Are you saying they do currently grow poppy?
Yes. So that's
no way. Really?
Yeah. And this has created a few problems for Tasmania, because there was a company, I think it was Johnson & Johnson was producing opioids, pharmaceuticals. And that was mostly being produced by Tasmanian alkaloids in Tasmania. And so when Johnson & Johnson actually got sued, I think it was within the past 5 years, because of how much opioids had ravaged a state. I think it was a city within New York, within a state. They got sued, and people were then pointing the finger at Tasmanian alkaloids and saying, you guys are producing all this poppy being used to make opium, which is killing people. Now, I don't think the farmers, of course, should be blamed because they don't choose what happens with the poppy. And even, a lot of opioids are very useful. Like, I don't want to take away from their benefits. But the idea of if that was swapped out with cannabis or largely substituted with cannabis, the change in perception towards places like Tasmania would be huge. But the point I mainly wanted to get to was you mentioned the outdoor growing and how ideal the climate is. And you think about the costs that go into growing cannabis, the rent for the land, obviously, but if you're building a greenhouse or some kind of grow house, the lights you use, growing outdoors in places like New Zealand and Australia would surely reduce the end cost of the cannabis being sold to consumers, would it not?
Massively. And let's not just think about it, the end consumer cannabis cost, because that freaks people out. That concept of it's going to be dirt cheap and our kids are going to get it so easily. Like that is a topic I try to distance from because it's not true. What we're saying is at a wholesale level, the plant itself becomes a lot cheaper because you don't have the overheads. Therefore, the medicines that are extracted from that become cheaper. So that's a real clear point to make. It's not saying weed's going to be super cheap for everybody. The medicine's going to be cheap. So instead of, like I said before, that CBD costing $700 a bottle, it's going to cost $70 a bottle, which is where it should be. It should be an affordable price. But yeah, the overheads, that's what people don't truly understand, is even though other countries legalize cannabis, the overheads of growing indoors is so high that it pushes up the price of a lot of products, whereas New Zealand and Australia are going to benefit to be able to grow it outdoors and cut all those costs, which is going to allow us to be a center hub of the cannabis industry worldwide, not just a player in it, not just a contributor. We're going to be one of the key areas. And the best way to explain this is cannabis and wine and grapes grow the best at the same place. So we're talking 43-degree latitude. That's the same as southern France, northern Spain. It's the same as southern Australia. It's the same as the middle of New Zealand. You can get wine from other places, but you don't because it's not as good, right? You buy New Zealand, Australian, and French wine because they have the best place to grow it and it's the best quality. That's going to be the exact same with cannabis products. People are going to buy New Zealand and Australian products at a higher price margin because they're viewed upon as greater quality. And that right there is something people don't truly understand. They don't see that New Zealand and Australia could be the leaders of this industry. And if we get in early enough before the other countries have established, we will be the leaders. Not could be, we will be. And that's what's going to kill me inside if we vote no, is watching every other country in the world legalize and the whole economy boom, and we can't have any piece of it. So to give perspective, currently worldwide, the legal cannabis industry is $10 billion. In 2024, it's predicted to be $100 billion. We're talking about a 10 times increase in 4 years. Because New Zealand, we're the leading of the vote. We're one of the first countries to have the vote, but huge amount of countries are going to be voting soon. They've just legalized medicinal in the UK. They've legalized medicinal in lots of different places, Portugal and Spain. They've all got thriving medicinal industries starting. Those places are going to just get more and more and more. The demand's going to get higher and higher and higher, and more countries are going to tap into this and be like, wow, the rest of the world's doing it, so let's do it too. So it'll just be so bad if we vote no and every other country votes yes, because people think, oh, it's fine, we'll just vote again. No, we won't. It'll take 10 years to have another vote. This is not something that we're just going to be able to willingly decide next election. It takes the right type of political power to be in charge to actually get the vote out there. Like we had we had a very difficult time just getting the actual vote, let alone the result of the vote. So I encourage people massively to view this and with this vote with a lot of importance. It's very, very important. We're talking about coronavirus, right? The cannabis industry in New Zealand will create over 12,000 jobs directly that touches cannabis, and then thousands more from the accounting, the consulting, the security, the construction, everything in between. So let's say 20,000 jobs. Right now, cannabis is available, even though it's illegal. So this is not a vote on, are we allowing cannabis to be available? This is a vote on saying, are we going to regulate the cannabis that is available and actually create real jobs, real tax, and real control? That is a no-brainer to me. We're going into a worldwide recession. It's going to be the biggest recession we've ever seen. And you get this opportunity to legalize something that could create 20,000 jobs and pump $1 billion into the economy. It's like what I would love someone to tell me what their biggest negative of legalizing is, and then let's just weigh it beside the positive, and let's see if it comes anywhere near. Because if it was so bad, show me the mass graves, show me the dead bodies, show me the reports of it killing people and doing what pharmaceuticals are currently doing. Like alcohol alone, 100,000, 150,000 people a year die from alcohol overdose every year. 88,000 people die from opioid overdose every year. You cannot, and let me repeat that, you cannot die from cannabis overdose. It is impossible. You could not eat or consume enough in your lifetime to actually cause an overdose. It's literally impossible. So to me, that just makes logical sense. It's a no-brainer. Oh, you're telling me the worst thing that can happen is, I don't know. I would love to hear people's opinions on what they think the worst thing that can happen, because from what I've seen overseas, it doesn't exist. This negative outcome doesn't exist. So, yeah, I think a lot of people are using cannabis to blame bad situations of their life on. So if someone's brother is not succeeding in life and he happens to smoke cannabis, people love to associate the cannabis being the fault. Unfortunately, it might actually be your brother's fault. He might just not actually be a very productive person. He might have a couple of traumas that he's dealing with. He might have broken up with his girlfriend or his boyfriend or whatever, right? And then he's using cannabis to help him through that time. But people are looking for an excuse. They're trying to take blame off themselves or their loved ones and put it on a third-party object. And yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem right there, is people associating negatives of cannabis without actually having proof that cannabis is the cause of it. Because I love to bring people's attention to correlation does not mean causation. Google that, look it up. Correlation does not mean causation. What that's saying is, we'll use paracetamol again as an example. You've got 100 people, they've all got chronic headaches. You test their blood, they all have paracetamol in their blood. Therefore, paracetamol causes headaches. So it doesn't work like that. They used the paracetamol because they had the headache. But your logic is, that's the kind of logic you're putting towards cannabis. You're saying people have depression or have a bad life and they're using cannabis, therefore cannabis caused that. No, the bad life came first, so they started using the cannabis. And trying to get that point across to people is very difficult, very, very difficult. It's a touchy and emotional subject.
Yeah, I think it's very unilateral, the way people ascribe cannabis as the cause only of problems, really. You never really hear of, Michael Phelps, who's the famous Olympian who notoriously smokes a lot of cannabis, or I think Nate Diaz, the MMA fighter, or Seth Rogen, obviously, the amazing filmmaker and actor. Yeah, it's very rare that these people's achievements are attributed to cannabis. It's very rare that we say to Seth Rogen, look, I don't think you can, Seth Rogen might be a unique example, but all the others, they don't say, I don't think you could finish this race if you weren't, smoking cannabis once a month, to Michael Phelps. No one says that. And yet when it's the reverse and you're looking for problems, for some reason, cannabis is one of the number one things that comes up because of, I guess, the propaganda that's been drilled into people for decades and decades. But in your part of the final closing questions I'll ask you, Stephen, is in your time researching cannabis for your documentary and throughout the years that you became interested in it, you mentioned a medicinal need for you to begin trying it. In all that time, what would you say the single most interesting thing you learned about cannabis was?
I would say that the single most interesting thing I learned about cannabis would be the diversity of the plant and the amount of medicinal benefits that come from it. So people think weed's weed. They don't understand, they truly don't understand that you have thousands of different strains of this plant, and they physically look different. They physically smell different. They give you different effects. They have different profiles of cannabinoids. Just to put it out there quickly, cannabinoids are THC, CBD, and all the other cannabinoids in the plant. So you've got CBGs, you've got THCV, you've got a multitude of these things. And they all separately have different medicinal benefits. That to me was like, you've got to be joking. You're telling me that you can have 100 different medicines from this one plant? Yes, you can. Mind blown. Like, this is not just for anxiety. This is not just for fibromyalgia. This is not just for Parkinson's disease, not just for epilepsy, not just for, you have so many benefits. And they're not just, that cannabis doesn't just help. In some regards, people would call it a cure. People that have had insomnia for 30 years and they use cannabis and have the best night's sleep they've ever had. That's mind-blowing. And I didn't truly know that before I dove into the research and dove into the facts. I had no concept of how specific you could get with cannabis. Yeah.
I mean, great points. And something you mentioned earlier and touching upon that is cannabis not only can cure, a host of ailments, and then there's CBD, which can do so without the intoxicating effects. But as you mentioned earlier, there's the litany of industries that cannabis can make its way into, whether that be paper, as we mentioned, is one of the original causes for its prohibition, fashion, clothing through hemp textiles. You got medicines, you've got pet foods. You've got
oil, you've got concretes, you've got biodegradable plastics, clothing. There's so many avenues that this plant goes down. It truly is the gift, this plant. People don't fully understand how large this industry is going to be. This is not just about smoking cannabis. This is not just about medicinal benefits. This is about full restructure of how we live our lives. Just to clarify that point that anyone's listening, if you didn't realize, you can make biodegradable plastics through using hemp fiber. You can make clothing using hemp fiber. You can make paper using hemp fiber. You can make concrete that is as strong as the current concrete and is actually resistant to mold and resistant to breakdown and resistant to fire through hemp. You can make biodegradable oil that your vehicle can run on from hemp. These are facts. This is not hippie opinionated stuff. This is straight facts. And all you have to do is Google search to find this out. And people don't. They hear this and they just say, that's too good to be true. I'm letting you know it is so good that I see why you're skeptical, but it literally is that true. I don't think we'll ever stumble across anything in life that is going to be, is this good to be true? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say that and maybe chocolate. Chocolate and cannabis together. They're both pretty equal in their benefits to humanity. But perfect answer, Stephen. And before we end this, where can people find you? Where can people find your documentary?
So I am the Buzzy Kiwi on all platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. I posted the documentary on all platforms so that if I had any issues with it being taken down or suppressed by social media, there was other avenues. So if you go to any of my accounts, you'll find the documentary. It's called Grassroots, The Reality of Cannabis Legalisation. It's 16 minutes and 20 seconds long, so it's not a lot of time. It's short and impactful information. I wanted to make it that way so people, in this world where we've got desensitized to content and we have such a short attention span, I really wanted to try and hone in on those facts and just have them one after another. So if you've got a spare 15 minutes, go check it out. You'll learn something new. I promise you'll learn something new. I don't care how much you know about cannabis, you will learn something new.
Awesome. Well, great speaking to you, Stephen. It's a pleasure. And what's on the horizon? Have you got any other documentaries planned?
I do. What I have decided is I will never make one by myself again.
Fair enough.
There is so much that goes into making a film, and it's been humbling. So I have concepts for future documentaries, and I'm going to pitch those to get funding and get a team. And I'm using this as a case study of what I can do, and then the future is, who knows? I've got a lot of ideas, and honestly, it comes down to who's willing to pay for it.
I love it. Well, it's been great chatting with you, Stephen. You've definitely been buzzy, so I appreciate that. Thank you for your time. Any final words before we end this?
Please have the courage to have these conversations. I respect you so much for giving me the time to dive into this and to get a bit uncomfortable and to talk about something controversial, because the only way we're going to make any change in the world is by having these conversations. So don't be the doctor that walked away thinking he knew everything. Be open-minded to listen. That's all I've got to say.
100%. Well, thank you, Stephen. It's been a pleasure, and I'll speak to you soon.
Pleasure, mate. Thank you very much.
Have a good one, buddy.
Alrighty, guys, that was Stephen McDowell, the Buzzy Kiwi. Make sure to check him out across all of his social channels at the Buzzy Kiwi, and particularly check out his documentary called Grassroots. It's on YouTube, it's on all platforms, and it's highly important. I would really recommend it, especially as we're just a bit over 2 weeks away from New Zealand's cannabis referendum. Make sure to send it to as many people as you can who are perhaps thinking about voting no on the referendum, or even those who are thinking about voting yes, just to brush them up on their cannabis knowledge. But thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. And as always, stay tuned for more episodes of the CannaCast.